Today we're going to take a quick look at export tags. Export tags allow you to basically copy a jace, its points, its folder structure, and basically duplicate that in a supervisor station for you automatically. This can also bring in all your histories. It allows you to override the configuration histories where maybe you want to store 500 points in the jace, but when it gets to the supervisor, you want the supervisor to collect 5,000. You can do that all automatically. All right, let's dive in here. So one of the prerequisites before you can really set this up is you got to make sure that your jace has got the export tag jar file installed. That's just a normal process of going in the software manager, installing that jar, and you should be all set. After that, you're going to want to open up the export tag palette. There's two extensions that got to be added under the Niagara network. Now, what I have here is a demo station that is basically set up as a jace, and I have another station here that's set up as our supervisor. Right now, under the Niagara network, for both of these, you'll see that they don't know anything. They're not connected. Nothing's really going. Under the jace, I do have a couple backnet devices in here with points. I do have history set up, but I don't have any tags added. This is really just, here's a jace with a couple devices and a simple folder structure. So to get started, you're going to want to add these two export tag networks. The supervisor obviously gets the supervisor export tag network, and this will go under the Niagara network. As far as the supervisor is concerned, that's pretty much all you have to do. I don't ever change any of this. I just go with the default. Under every jace, that's the subordinate export tag network is the one you need. This is the devices that'll be pushing stuff up to the supervisor must have this extension on their Niagara network. So for starters, I usually like to get the two sides of the equations talking to each other over the Niagara network. It's not necessary. You can do this without that, but I find it just makes troubleshooting easier. A lot of the times when there's a failure, it's a simple permissions issue between the jace and the supervisor, or vice versa. So on my jace here, on the Niagara network, I'm going to create the connection to the supervisor. Just going to add new. Add in all the basic stuff, the IP address, port we're going to connect on, username, password, nothing special there. And then I usually like to ping it a minute, make sure that it's not faulting out, and boom, we have a connection. So now if I come over to the supervisor, we should have that entry already in there. We're just going to turn around and basically set this guy up. This 1912. I'm not going to use Fox here. And admin. And we're going to enable the connection. This guy looks like it linked up. Quick ping. All right. So we have communications between our jace to the supervisor and the supervisor to the jace. So we know that problem is not going to be an issue when we start adding this tag network. All right, so we have the connection under the Niagara network on both these. So they can see each other, they're happy, everything's fine and dandy. So now we're going to go under the subordinate export tag network in your jace, and there's some setup that we have to do. We're going to want to enable this a minute, hit save, and then disable it again. And the reason you're enabling that is because the first time you enable it, it adds a join profile down here that we need to make some changes to. Now, anytime you make changes to this, you kind of have that profile disabled. Otherwise, you're going to unleash the gremlins, apparently. So we're going to go into this default profile that it created for us. And if we look, this is basically setting up the connection in the supervisor. So this is all as a supervisor is looking at the jace. That is the point of view that you got to keep in mind here. A few things that I normally change is to make sure that I'm syncing out my users from the supervisor down to the jace. Another thing I usually look at is the alarms. I want to make sure this is use existing. I want to keep all my alarm classes the same on my jaces as my supervisor. That's typically how I set it up. So I might have a critical, a monitoring, and a maintenance alarm class. I'll have the same buckets essentially set up in my supervisor, and this is basically telling it, hey, just pass the critical alarms from the critical alarm class in the jace to the critical alarm class in the supervisor. This is going to prepend the jace name, so you're going to get the station name in front of the alarms, which is helpful to figure out, you know, where the heck are these alarms coming from, especially if you have tons and tons of jaces. If you weren't, we don't need to set up this IP address because we already made the two connections. If you wanted to set this up so that maybe the jace is never connected to the supervisor before, you'd have to set up an IP address in here. We're going to save this. We're going to go back to the subordinate export tag network under the jace. Open that up, and we need to set up a station display name. This is usually just the your station name. Subordinate users, password, we don't really need to set those up because we've pre-done that connection. If you didn't, you would have to put a username and password, and that will be the username and password that the supervisor is calling back to the jace with. So this would have to be a user account within the jace. IP address, just another spot. If you didn't have that connection already set up, you could put the jace IP address in here and it'll set up the supervisor. The rest of this is nothing I'm going to go over. So we save that. We're going to enable it. And right now, so we have this set up, but we don't have any tags. All right, so let's try our first join. So within the jace, and you can do this from both ends. You can do it from the supervisor or the jace. Normally I'm doing it from the jace. Under actions on that subordinate tag network, there's an action join. I hit that off, and you can see that it did go through without a problem. So because we don't have any tags assigned to any points, this really didn't do much. The one thing it did do, and I didn't go over this earlier, but I do have my sync in allowed from the supervisor in the jace, but this was not set up in the supervisor. So if we look in the supervisor now, you'll see that we are syncing out the users from the supervisor down to the jace. So it did set that up for us, even without setting up any of these point tags. So at this point, we're ready to start tagging the station. We know that the export tag network's working, our connectivity between the two are good. We can start looking at actually start tagging up things. Now this jace, we already had a couple devices in here. We got a couple folders. This might just be how I set up, you know, multiple buildings. Maybe I got a building folder and then I break it down by equipment. So anyway, we got an air handler here. This air handler, we got a handful of points, nothing spectacular. And then we got a bunch of logs on these. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. Normally, I would set this up as I'm bringing the devices in initially. And if that's the case, I would set up one point with the tags, the histories that I need, and I just basically paste it on the points as I'm going through adding stuff. Here, since we already have this is more like an existing site maybe that someone didn't put up the tags on it. So I'm going to start by just manually doing one point, and then we'll look at using the program service. So we got a Y1 status point. We're going to add a point tag to it. This is basically any point that I want to push up to the supervisor. It's got to have this point tag on it. The setup's pretty minimal, and it's something that's basically using B format. So once you set up one, you can just kind of paste this throughout everything, and you're good to go. The key to just copying the structure within the jace, if you just want to copy it identically, then the one thing that you're looking for is this network folder path. So this is basically going to duplicate the structure identically as it is in the jace, and it's going to put it under this jace in the Niagara network in its points. You can see right now in the points, we don't have anything under this jace. I mean, this is just one that we basically got a connection set up and we're syncing users now. So with this in here, if we were to run this join, and the other thing we need to do is set where we're sending this. If we were to join this now, it's going to create this one point in a points folder under Air Handler 1 in an AHU folder in the Building XYZ folder. We can see that by doing a quick join. See the success, and let's take a look at what that did. So there you go. We brought that one point on in. It duplicated the folder structure identically. Now, this didn't do anything for our history that's on that point. We still don't have anything as far as the history's brought in. So let's take a quick look at setting up a history tag. That would be this history import tag. You want to add that to your histories if you want them pushed up. A little bit of setup here. You do have to tell it where you're going to send it. And then the other thing I normally look at, there's two things here. This execution time is how often the supervisor is going to collect your histories. You can set that to daily, but if you're doing graphics with logs and you want somewhat, fresh data on there, you're probably going to want to change that to interval. Maybe every couple hours or every hour. I find even on fairly big sites, every hour doesn't seem to tax things. Let's assume an Ethernet networks and you have a decent sized server and nothing's taxed to the limits. So I'm going to roll with an hour there. So every hour the supervisor is going to go out and it's going to pull whatever data logs that it doesn't have. This config overrides, this is where you can set up, maybe you got 500 points, the default setup in the jace. So this one has the default setup. It's just going to hold the last 500 records. Maybe in the supervisor we want more than that. Unlimited is the default, probably not recommended. At some point it's going to be a time bomb, your hard drive's going to overflow, but let's go with 5,000. So we'll store 10 times that in the supervisor. The rest of this I don't normally change. Just pull on demand, that allows someone, if they're looking at one of the graph views, they can pull in the live data directly. The rest of the stuff, I rarely use it. And one thing to note too about this history import is this history does have, I have some metadata already associated with it. So the metadata that you have set up on your histories will get pushed over to the supervisor. So again, we don't have any histories in the supervisor right now. We do have the one point tag set up. So let's do a join and see what happens here. So we had the success. We know that worked. You'll see that we do have the jace here now. There's our data log. Probably not much in there, as I just set everything up. Not anything. Good enough. So that's, normally if I was starting a jace and then maybe I didn't have, these are points I just pulled in fresh from a discovery, I would normally grab the history, grab the point tag, and basically just copy and just plop these things on here. Everything's using B format to set the actual names. So there's no reason that you can't just plop them in. Now, obviously, I got a Boolean history here. These are numeric points. I'd have to add a new numeric history, then add the tag. But again, the tag, this is really the only setup are these 2 points. And this doesn't change regardless of the history type. So we can easily come You know, if this was a new controller, I could add the history extension on there. Enable it, and obviously this one's not going to have the metadata is going to be screwed up, but I can add the point tag, add the history import, and now I got a setup that I can copy for all my numeric points. Just grab those two and just plop them away. So all right, so we got that device tagged. We got all our histories set up, tagged. Now they haven't been activated yet, I'm guessing. So let's take a look. We'll enable them so they're there. And now if we do a join, there we go. We got all those points. And not only did we get those points, you can see we got all their histories. Came right on through. So that's how you can do it, or how I would normally do it if I was adding points, you know, from a fresh device, something I'm not copying. If I had a bunch of stuff on an existing jace and someone was too lazy to set up the export tags, you know, I would use the program service to add these. The program service, we got a couple different steps here. First of all, we want to add all the point tags. Here I just have numeric points. All right, so we're going to find all the numeric points just in those two devices. So we do want to limit our search down because obviously I don't want two sets of points on the one device we've already set up. So this is just looking in the VAV folder, grab all the numeric points. Now let's grab them all from this central plan folder. So we got all the points. Now obviously if you had numeric, Boolean, multi-state, you might have to do a couple passes or, you know, deal with it. And once you have them all in here too, there might be some points that you don't want. Obviously you can pick and clear them out of this list, but let's just say we're going to take them all. So we're going to add the point tag. And that'll be found obviously in the export tags. We're looking for a point tag. And we can set up basically the same stuff we were setting up before. All right, we got the supervisor station set, and there's a way to set this in all jace wide, so you don't necessarily need to always remember to set that. And then we're using the same path as everywhere, which basically just duplicates it out. We're going to add it. Should now have a point tag on every single point. We did the join, that would move all the points, but we still haven't dealt with the histories. One caveat on the histories is you cannot edit the config override with the program service. So just keep that in mind. So we're going to find the histories. And this is pretty easy because we know they're all numeric. So I'm just going to do a search for the numeric histories. History, numeric history interval. We're going to find them all on the boiler plant. Do one more quick pass to get the ones on the VAVs. Now we got them all. Same style. It's call it history import tag. Obviously it's going to be in export tags again. And history import tag. I'm going to leave this blank and I'll show you how you can add it. And again, this is the one downfall to this is you cannot edit that. This, I'm going to go back with my 1 hour. It's all right. That looks good. We're missing the supervisor station. But anyway, there we go. And you can see we added that to everything. So we screwed up and we forgot to set that the export tag, the station name on some of these. So some of these, when we join, it's either going to fail or it's not going to pass them on up because we didn't tell it where we want to send them. When you look at the tags and that export tag summary manager that brings you to this screen, there's a button here to just say, hey, set all my tags to go to XYZ station. So if you do forget it, there's a quick, easy way to set it on everything. So now we're set. We got the history tags. We got point tags on all our other devices. We're ready to join this up. Do the join. If all goes well, we should have a success. We do. So now, if we take a look, let me collapse some of this stuff here. In our supervisor, you'll notice we have basically a duplicate of what we had in the jace. There's all our points. They'll come up with live data, so we're ready to start creating graphics on those. We didn't have to set up anything in the supervisor. All we had to do is just copy, paste, or use a program service and add the point tag and the history point tags. Copies them, and you'll see here's all the histories. And I did set the metadata. Obviously, we screwed some of them up because I deleted them and recreated them. But you'll see all the metadata that I had set up before is there, and we can sort on it, and our histories are all grouped in together logically. So let's talk about a few other things. So troubleshooting, if something goes wrong, where do you want to start looking? It's going to just tell you, the little pop-up down in the corner over here is going to pop up saying that it failed, and it's not really going to give you much. Where you're going to want to look is in the job service. You'll see, on either end, you're going to see this subordinate join job. If you look at that in the job service and you click on the chevrons here, it's going to give you a list of basically all the actions it took. So every point that gets copied in, every history, there's going to be an entry in here telling you what it did. I can tell you from experience, this works from your nav path down, and basically from the top of the station down. So if we look, you'll see it did the air handler first, and then the VAV, and then my central plant, and that's basically just following the normal tree right on down the path. When it fails, you'll see all the ones that succeeded, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's going to say, hey, I failed, blah, blah, blah. It might not even give that descriptive of an error, but at least it's telling you the points. You can see right up until the point it failed where it was in the station. So this is a good way to just go right on back. More than likely, it's the next point, down your tree that it failed at, and that's where you have the problem. So I always use that to figure out where the heck do I want to start looking. And that's pretty much all I really ever have to do for troubleshooting. Sometimes, a lot of people, when they first set it up, I see nothing but permission issues. Again, that's why I recommend just set up your connections in the Niagara network first. Get your jace and your supervisor talking to each other. It'll eliminate that issue. There are, in the export tags, there's a way to export your PX graphics with a PXX view tag. Not a big fan of those. Sometimes it works really good, and the performance isn't too bad on the supervisor. Other times, I've had it just come to an absolute crawl. And this is something you don't want to find out after you've set up a ton of graphics and you dicked around with getting this PX view tag to work right, to find out that it's so slow that you have to abandon that method. The other thing with this too is this substitute override ORDs. So when you use a PX view tag, it will try to sort out all the changes to your ORDs, and it works pretty well as long as everything's relative. But there's always some links in your graphics that aren't relative. They're mainly, typically, like your navigation buttons on, bouncing around just your general navigation, your networks. So then you have to use a substitute override ORDs, where basically you're saying, if this is the ORD, replace it with this one. This gets really clunky really fast. You can use the program service to edit this. The problem is that you're probably going to find you got 10 different things you're overriding, and you need to add the 11th. Well, when you go into the program service to edit this, it comes up with a blank list, which means you got to add in, the 10 entries first before you can add the 11th, and then apply it to everything. And it just eats up a ton of time. Real headache. And then the other thing is, you might get done with it and find out that the performance is so awfully slow that you really wasted a lot of time. So I don't recommend that. To copy your graphics, if you did have graphics already set up in the jace, your biggest difference is, instead of it being under, all your points being under, let's say, the BACnet network and then blah, 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 wherever they're going to be, they're now under the Niagara network and the jace name. So basically, you're typically doing a find replace for BACnet network and just changing it for Niagara network, blah, 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 jace, and then you're in the points/points. So you might be looking for those 3 items, doing a find replace on your PX files, which if you do that in text mode, just edit your PX, go and view it as a text file, do the find replace. It's pretty quick and easy to take your graphics and move them to the supervisor. If your graphics are completely relative, like I had air handler, blah, blah, whatever, air handler 1 graphics, and all the links on that graphic were relative, then it's just a copy paste. You can just take it right from the jace into the supervisor because, again, our structure, it's all identical. So if your graphics are relative from that point down, then no problems. Just copy, paste it, link it back, assign your link. You're good. The other thing to note on export tags, if I deleted out the whole thing, I can just bring it right back by doing a join again. There it all is. The one thing to note is export tags. When you do the join, it never deletes. It only adds. So if you're in here and you're, let's say you're changing names or maybe adding things. It's not going to delete this air handler 1. No, it's still there. And it's going to add an air handler 2. So just keep that in mind. If you start making a lot of changes and joining up, that sometimes you get junk in your supervisor because it will never delete it. And it's kind of a nice thing because if you did have a lot of setup and you made a mistake and joined, it's still there. So you can always go back. But that's one thing to note. If I am making changes in the jace, that I do have to remember to come back and just prune out garbage from the supervisor. Other than that, that's pretty much it. That's all you should need to know to get up and rolling with export tags.